The helpless alien woman screams, "What do I have to do to bond with you tonight, human?"
The upper floors of Outpost District 14's comms tower had long since been gutted by time. Walls scorched from electrical fires, ceilings collapsed under the weight of frost and silence. There hadn't been a system ping from Central Command in over 2 years. The tower should have been dead, but someone still lived there. Rain Solon knelt over a spread of power tools near a disassembled wall conduit, jaw tight as he adjusted the terminals inside. Thin curls of frost smoke rose from his breath. He wore a fitted thermal undersuit beneath a torn expedition-grade coat, the sleeve patched with old mission tags from when he still worked for the Archive Reclamation Bureau. He hadn't seen another living person in nearly 6 months. The lights flickered again. A sharp crack of electricity snapped from the panel. "Damn it," Rain muttered, yanking his hand back as the breaker hissed. The storm had overloaded the backup grid again. That meant the outer hatch seals were running on passive lock, and the heating coils were dropping. The comm tower had once been a communications relay for 10 different planetary networks. Now it was a tomb full of dead languages. Rain had been tasked with recovering whatever symbology, linguistic records, and cultural artifacts he could still decode from the flooded data archives in the lower floors. He stayed because no one else would, and because after the collapse, there wasn't anywhere else left that still cared about what the old worlds used to mean. He stood, shoulders aching, and walked toward the inner chamber. The ration processor buzzed low, barely enough power to heat fluid. He glanced at the display. Internal temperature, 10.8 degrees Celsius and dropping. Not life-threatening. Not yet. Then came a sound. A thud, low, sharp, deliberate. Metal on metal. Rain turned, instantly alert. Another thud. Then 3 more in quick succession. Not debris. Not wind. Someone, or something, was hitting the pressure hatch from the outside. He moved fast, grabbing the short batten from the crate near the door. Not that it would help much if someone hostile got in. The comms tower wasn't fortified. It wasn't even heated properly. There was no real defense. Just walls, ice, and quiet resolve. He descended the narrow stairwell to the lower hatch bay, boots loud on the metal steps. As he reached the panel, his fingers hesitated over the manual override. No motion signature had registered on his security panel, which meant whoever was out there wasn't wearing a beacon. He checked the viewport. Nothing. Then movement. A flash of color. Pale green. A shadow slumped against the door frame, shivering. Rain released the seal. The exterior hatch hissed open, spilling in a gust of air that burned his skin through the fabric of his coat. The figure fell forward. A woman. Humanoid. Unmistakably alien. She collapsed hard against the threshold, face down, limbs stiff from exposure. Her skin was an unnatural shade of pale green, tinged blue around the fingertips and toes. Her body trembled violently. She wore no shoes, no protective suit, only a soaked, torn garment that clung to her like wet paper, ritualistic by the look of it. Ceremonial, not functional. One shoulder was bare. Ink markings lined her thighs and lower abdomen. Faded bonding symbols from a species Rain hadn't seen in years. He recognized her race instantly. Ruarian. He hadn't seen one alive since before the Exodus. She raised her head, barely. Her eyes glowed faint teal. Bloodshot. Panicked. Then she spoke, voice hoarse from cold and desperation. There was no subtlety, no caution in her tone. "What do I have to do to bond with you tonight, human? Please, just let me in." The words hit hard. Not just the urgency, but the clarity. No translator, no misunderstanding. She knew what she was saying. Rain didn't answer. He simply stepped aside. She collapsed fully onto the grated floor, too weak to hold herself upright. Rain bent down, lifted her under the arms. Her body was ice cold and soaked through, and carried her inside the sealed chamber. His breath caught in his throat at the heatless feel of her skin. She weighed less than expected. Starvation, exposure, both. He sealed the inner hatch behind them, locked the chamber, and cranked the emergency coil to max output. Heat spilled into the room like a lifeline. He lowered her near the coil and covered her with his own thermal coat. The foiled blanket from the ration box came next, wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her teeth were clattering so violently he worried she'd crack a molar. He opened a med kit. Her hands were raw, skin cracked open from exposure. He sprayed bonding foam over the wounds and wrapped them in heat tape. Her feet were worse. Her soles had torn, bleeding, possibly infected. No one should have made it across the snowfields barefoot. Rain worked without asking questions. He was good at that, responding to crisis without freezing up. His hands moved quickly but gently, applying salve, wiping blood, sealing gashes. She didn't resist. She barely blinked. Only when he sat back on his heels did she finally look up again. "You didn't take me." Her voice was quieter now, steadier, but confused. "You didn't touch me. I'm not here for that," Rain said. His voice came out flatter than intended. He cleared his throat. "You're injured. You need to recover." She sat up slowly, the foil slipping down her arm. Her skin was still damp, her collarbone visible beneath the dim lighting. She didn't reach to cover herself. "Most humans don't help unless there's a price," she said. "And I have nothing. You're alive. That's enough." Her expression didn't change. She wasn't convinced. "You're Ruarian," he added after a pause. She flinched at the word. "Not anymore. My sect was marked for exclusion. Non-integratable. That's what the resettlement AI called us." "What happened to your unit?" She looked down. Her fingers curled around the foil. "I buried the last of them 3 nights ago." She wasn't exaggerating. Rain could hear it in her voice, flat, hollow, detached. Trauma didn't shout. It whispered like that. "You shouldn't have survived that walk," he said. "The last station is over 20 kilometers south. I didn't walk it all at once." She lifted her eyes. "I crawled most of it." Rain stared at her. He felt a tightening in his chest that he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. He turned away to grab a heat pack from the shelf and tossed it to her. "Keep that against your chest. It'll help stabilize your core temp." She nodded, didn't thank him, just followed instructions. He returned to his seat at the edge of the room, cross-legged, watching her from a respectful distance. Neither of them said anything for a long time. The wind outside howled louder now. Rain glanced at the wall screen. The tower's exterior thermal signature had spiked, probably from the emergency coil and her body heat. He didn't like what that might trigger. Old surveillance grids sometimes reactivated under thermal inconsistencies. He'd have to monitor it closely. She shifted under the blanket, her legs folding to the side. The foil now clutched around her chest like armor. Her breathing had evened out, though the occasional tremor still ran through her limbs. "I'm Narration," she said quietly. He nodded. "Rain." Another pause. "I don't want to offer myself again," she added. "But I didn't want to die out there either." Rain looked at her, this time directly, not as a figure to patch up, but as someone who had walked into his world uninvited, yet somehow necessary. "I'm not going to ask you for anything," he said. "Sleep, eat, heal. That's all." Her eyes stayed on him for a long moment. She didn't smile, didn't relax, but she let her body sink slightly against the wall. Eventually, her head tilted. Her breathing slowed. She fell asleep there, curled up on the floor, her hands still clutching the coat he'd given her like a lifeline she wasn't ready to trust yet. Rain sat in silence, his fingers slowly tapping on the side of his boot. Outside, the wind continued its endless chorus. Inside, something unfamiliar had entered his space. Not a threat, not a guest, not yet a companion. Just a question he hadn't answered. What happens now? In a second, more dangerous, one he hadn't dared ask until that moment. Why do I care this much already? He didn't sleep that night. Not because of the noise. Because for the first time in months, someone else was breathing in the room. And that changed everything. Rain stood by the viewport, staring at the frost-lined glass. The storm outside had calmed, but the low hum of power fluctuations still echoed in the tower's superstructure. The environmental readout glowed soft orange above the sealed hatch. Interior temp, 12.6 degrees Celsius. Better, stable, but not enough to guarantee safety if the sensors activated again. He turned back to the room. Narration hadn't moved much. She lay where he'd left her hours ago, curled against the thermal coil, Rain's coat bundled around her torso. Her breathing had settled into a quiet rhythm, deeper now, still guarded but not labored. Her damp hair, clung to her cheekbones. Her hands, wrapped in heat tape and med foam, rested over her chest, one rising and falling with each breath. The glow from her bioluminescent skin had faded to a barely visible shimmer. Conserving energy, he guessed. Or maybe it had dulled from exhaustion. Rain crossed the room and sat near the opposite wall. The concrete was cold, even through his pants. He leaned against a pipe column and finally let himself exhale. He hadn't processed it until now. What she'd screamed when she arrived. That raw, desperate plea. What I have to do to bond with you tonight, human? He hadn't answered her. Not directly, but the question still echoed in the room. Loud in the silence. Not just a plea for sex. Not even really about him. It was about the only survival mechanism she had left. Rain closed his eyes briefly. The archives had documented the Narration bonding rites years ago. Cultural scripts involving physical contact to establish emotional proximity. A system of trust exchange that had once been deeply respected across sectors. Until the AI administrations labeled the rituals as non-standardized behavior and purged their registry from compatibility programs. That was over 5 years ago. Rain had filed that deletion request himself. Not proudly, just as protocol. He stood, grabbed a protein packet from the emergency storage, and began prepping it. No need to wake her yet, but she'd need it when she stirred. The room still smelled faintly of rust and stale heat wraps, but it was a hell of an improvement over open windburn. Then a shift, a sharp inhale behind him. He turned. Narration had moved. She was sitting up now, the coat half slid from her shoulders. Her body visibly tense, not in pain, but alert. Her eyes were wide, flicking quickly around the room, trying to place herself. "You're safe," Rain said, keeping his voice low, calm. "No one else is here." She blinked, eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't respond. "You passed out. The cold nearly killed you." Still nothing, but her breathing slowed. She pulled the coat tighter across her chest, the foil crackling slightly. Ray moved back to the floor, sitting where she could see him but not feel cornered. "You're inside Outpost 14, comms tower section, upper east quadrant, 40 meters above ground. This area has been unmonitored since Central Command abandoned it a year ago." "I thought these towers were offline," she said finally. "Most are. This one was supposed to collapse last winter. It didn't." Narayan's gaze fell to her hands. She flexed her fingers slowly beneath the bandages, watching the skin stretch. "You're not military." "No," Rain said. "I'm an archivist. Language recovery. I'm here to salvage what's left of interspecies lexicons before they rot or get overwritten by AI standard code." She tilted her head slightly. "You study dead languages and live in a frozen calm tower." He shrugged. Fewer interruptions. There was a flicker at the edge of her expression. Not quite amusement, but something less severe. "I wasn't sure you were real," she murmured. "When the storm broke, I thought maybe I was already gone." "You're not. And you didn't touch me." "No." Narayan leaned back against the coil. She didn't speak again for several seconds. Rain didn't push her. "I was stationed at Refuge Delta for over 2 years, she said finally. "When the AI reevaluated population redundancy metrics, they decommissioned our block. Everyone else got assigned relocation vectors." She looked at him now, directly. "Our sect was labeled emotionally volatile. Too much variance in psychological bonding behaviors. That sounds like AI justification for cultural deletion." "That's exactly what it is." Rain absorbed that in silence. Her voice held no tremor, no performance. She wasn't trying to elicit sympathy, just stating what happened. "You could have gone south," he said. "There's a free zone at Calderas Basin. I tried. They scanned for genetic variants. My ink's encoded. They didn't let me pass." "You walked from there?" She nodded. 6 days. Half of them barefoot." Rain rubbed the back of his neck. His stomach turned slightly, hearing it spoken out loud. "You should have died out there." "I almost did." He handed her the protein pack. "Eat this. Slowly. You won't keep it down otherwise." Narayan hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed his for a moment. Cool, but not ice anymore. She unwrapped it, bit off a small piece, and chewed silently. Rain watched her as she ate. Her posture was different now. Less collapsed. More upright. like she'd remembered she had a spine. Her hair, though still damp, now framed her face more naturally. Her skin, green with a soft, internal shimmer, was beginning to glow faintly again. She caught him looking. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "Why didn't you leave with the others?" "Because they forgot what mattered," Rain said. "And I didn't." There was a beat of silence. Then her voice lowered, almost inaudible. "If I hadn't offered myself, would you still have let me in?" "Yes." She looked at him for a long time, searching for any flicker of dishonesty. She didn't find any. She shifted slightly, let the coat fall from her left shoulder again, but this time without tension. Not as an invitation, just as comfort. A part of herself she wasn't afraid to reveal. He didn't comment. Narration leaned her head back against the wall. Her body looked worn, but not defeated. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked. "Do the systems still scan this deep?" "Depends on how hot we run the coils," Rain said. "If they detect an irregular spike in thermal output or unknown organics, the old satellite sweeps could reflag this tower for a purge cycle." Her eyes narrowed. "And if they do, we'll deal with it," he said simply. "You mean you'll deal with it?" she replied. "You don't even know me." He met her gaze. "I know what they do to you." She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't the same as before. Not hostile, not cold. Something had shifted. She finished the ration, folded the wrapper, handed it back without a word. He took it. Their fingers touched again. This time, neither of them looked away. Rain stood, walked over to the corner near his sleeping platform, and picked up a spare thermal mat. He laid it out parallel to his own, not beside it, but not far either. She watched him the whole time. "I'm not sending you back out there," he said, "but I can't promise we're safe either." Narration adjusted the coat again, settling into her blanket. "Safety doesn't mean anything anymore," she said. "But warmth, that's harder to fake." She lay down. He turned off the central light. Only the dim orange glow from the wall coil remained, casting long shadows across the room. They didn't speak again that night, but both of them lay awake longer than they admitted, listening to the same wind, the same hum of the structure, and, finally, each other's breathing. And that was more connection than either had known in years. By morning, the temperature inside the tower had stabilized, but the air still carried a dry chill that settled in the lungs. Rain stirred awake first. He remained still for a moment, his eyes on the cracked ceiling, listening for any unusual sounds, grid fluctuations, climbing humidity, or the telltale hum of an active satellite scan. But the system stayed quiet. The threat, for now, hadn't escalated. Narration was still sleeping across the room, wrapped in his coat and part of a thermal blanket she'd reconfigured into a makeshift cloak. She had shifted during the night, her long white hair now spilling across her face and mat. Her breathing was calm, even, no tremors. Her skin emitted a faint, steady glow, soft teal in color, dimmer than when she'd first arrived, but steadier now. Rain sat up, ran a hand through his hair, and pulled on his utility gloves. The generators were due for another scan cycle. He needed to know if the heat spike from the emergency coil had left a trace on the tower's external signature. If the satellite grid picked up their anomaly, the AI protocols would begin flagging the outpost for review. And if that happened, they'd only have hours before a system-automated purge was dispatched. As he worked through the interface on the weathered terminal panel, his thoughts kept drifting back to her voice the night before. Her questions, her reasoning, her unfiltered desperation, but also her restraint once inside. The databanks flashed a result. Thermal output, plus 2.8%. External biosignature anomaly, pending review. He stared at the screen. That meant a proximity sensor sweep had pinged them. A dormant relay tower, cold and long abandoned, had suddenly registered organic heat. It didn't confirm her identity or species. Not yet, but a second sweep could. If that happened, the tower would be flagged for non-compliant occupancy, and AI enforcement systems would reallocate orbiting satellites to sterilize the structure. He shut the panel and stood. They didn't have time to wait and see. She stirred. Rain turned. Narayan's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the low morning light. Her expression was calm, but focused. She'd slept, but not deeply. Not the kind of sleep that comes with peace. He spoke first. We triggered a scan. Satellite grid registered a heat anomaly. No bio flag yet, but we're exposed. She sat up without hesitation. How long? Unknown. Could be hours. Could be days. But if a second scan confirms unauthorized presence, they'll purge this tower. She absorbed that quickly. Didn't panic. Her mind was already calculating. Do you have shielding? She asked. Thermal masking? Some, Rain said. But it's old. It covers the interior, not the external signature. Narration pushed back the blanket and stood. Her balance was slightly unsteady, but her posture was strong. She didn't look like the woman he'd pulled in from the snow 2 nights ago. What about rerouting power? If we cut back on heating, we can cool the signature before the next sweep. We'd freeze, Rain replied. Not if we stay in one sealed chamber, close off vents, and reduce exposure. He hesitated. She was thinking clearly, strategically, like someone who dealt with protocol systems before. You've done this, he said. I was security adjunct in Delta Refuge before they shut it down, she replied. I managed grid shielding and override coding. I know what to look for. That answered a question that had lingered since her arrival. How she survived so long. She hadn't just wandered aimlessly. She'd been trained once, used a structure, maybe even trusted. Come on, she said. Show me your generator access. They moved together to the lower tech deck, a narrow, frozen hallway behind the south stairwell. The walls here were thick with condensation, insulation long since eroded. Rain handed her a patch cord and opened the secondary relay. Narration crouched beside it and quickly traced the wiring with her fingers, her brows furrowed in concentration. You were asking to bond with me, Rain said suddenly. But you knew systems, knew the rules. You knew better than to think it would matter to the satellites. She didn't look up. That wasn't for the satellites, she said flatly. That was for you. Rain didn't respond at first. She paused her work and finally turned her head, locking eyes with him. I had nothing left. No rations. No tools. Just a body and the idea that maybe a human would want it long enough not to let me die in a doorway. He met her gaze. You were wrong. I was desperate, she said, and desperate people do things that shame them later. Rain stepped closer, crouched down beside her. You didn't shame yourself. You survived. That's all that matters. Something shifted in her face. Not softness, something harder to name. Like a crack in the wall she'd built between what she'd endured and what she still hoped might exist. Don't say things like that unless you mean them, she said quietly. I don't say anything unless I mean it. She held his gaze a moment longer, then turned back to the panel. We'll need to cut core power by 40% and isolate life support to this floor only. I'll reroute a masking pulse from the heating vent grid to confuse the sweep. Rain nodded, watching her fingers move with certainty across the control lines. She didn't need help. She needed trust. Within 20 minutes, they'd shut down the lower floors, cut heat across non-essential sectors, and sealed the tower's windows with matte shielding film. Narration moved carefully but deliberately, adjusting her makeshift wrap into tighter layers, now secured with torn utility belts she'd scavenged from Rain's supply locker. She no longer looked like a collapsed pilgrim. She looked like someone reclaiming control over her world. They returned to the central chamber, sitting in silence while the generator hummed at lower capacity. The air had grown colder already. Rain's breath fogged lightly as he handed her a hot drink pouch. Your ink, he said. You said it was encoded? She nodded. Ruarian bonds weren't just spiritual. The ink held sequences, emotional profile markers, bioreactive threads keyed to proximity and arousal. It wasn't just ritual. No, it was data, ancient, organic. The AI flagged it as incompatible, said our emotional cycles were too nonlinear to model, and that made you disposable. She nodded again, no emotion in her face this time. Rain leaned back against the wall. There's a biometric sync override embedded in some old compatibility systems. If we could trigger a valid bond protocol between us, it might confuse the enforcement scan. Register us as a paired unit. Narayan's eyes flicked toward him. You're talking about a cohab sync. Yes. Those require physical contact. Intimate proximity. I know. She looked away. And you do that? Even after what I said the night I came here. I would, he said simply. But not because you offered. Because now I want to. That silence returned, but it wasn't heavy. It was thick with possibility. She nodded slowly, eyes lowered, shoulders slightly rising as if carrying the weight of something she'd no longer run from. Not tonight, she said, but maybe soon. Ray nodded once. That's enough. They sat in the half-dark of the chamber, systems cooled to minimum output, shadows stretching long across the walls. The storm outside had passed, but something between them had started. Something fragile, real, and it would hold, at least long enough for the next decision. The second scan came at 2:17 local time. Rain jolted awake to a soft ping from the wall terminal. Just one flashing icon in the dark. Thermal discrepancy flagged. No purge order. Not yet. But the sweep grid had registered elevated warmth within the comms tower again. It meant they were still under watch. One more reading, and the system might commit to cleansing. He slipped from his cot silently, boots crunching against the frosted metal floor. The air inside had dropped to just above freezing. His breath fogged as he moved. Narration was already sitting up near the thermal coil. She hadn't been asleep. Her back was against the wall, knees tucked under the coat wrapped tightly around her. Her bioluminescence was dimmer than ever, almost gone, conserving energy. You saw it, she asked. Ray nodded. Second anomaly flag. Not a full match yet, but close. Narration didn't react outwardly, but she looked down, her fingers tightening around the edges of the thermal wrap. We can't drop the heat any further, Rain added. It's already pushing survivability levels. She pulled the wrap closer to her chest and stood, moving stiffly. Then we run the protocol. He didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched. You're sure? I am now. She met his gaze fully. No hesitation, just quiet resolve. Rain exhaled, turned to the terminal, and keyed in the biometric pairing interface, an outdated system buried in the tower's emergency override modules. A compatibility scan could trigger a misread in the enforcement sweep, tricking the AI into logging them as a bonded pair under the old Alliance Cohabitation Accord. But it required closeness, prolonged proximity, skin contact. Narration stepped closer. Her expression had changed again, less guarded, more grounded. Not offering, not bargaining, choosing. Tell me what to do, she said. Rain spoke calmly, but with precision. We have to initiate a sync. Biothermal feedback, shared breathing, pulse proximity. No implants, no simulation. The system's old. It's reading organic signatures, not words. Narration reached for the coat clasp and undid it slowly, letting it slide from her shoulders. Her skin, a pale green dusted with warmth-sensitive markings, was visibly cooler at the extremities. Rain's thermal tunic hung loosely on her frame. It was one of his spares she'd repurposed the day before. She didn't remove it, just stepped close enough for their bodies to share warmth between the layers. He opened his arms. She didn't hesitate. Their bodies met gently, not hungry or fast, but carefully, deliberately. Her hands pressed against his chest, fingers splayed. She could feel his heartbeat under the thermal fabric. He wrapped his arms around her lower back, resting his cheek lightly against her temple. Her skin was cool, but steady. She didn't tremble now. They stood like that in silence, the scanner behind them cycling up with a soft hum. Narayan's breath caught once, just once, then steadied. This doesn't feel like survival anymore, she said quietly, eyes closed. Rain's voice was just above a whisper. It isn't. A tone chimed behind them. The scan had finished. Rain turned to check the interface. The screen flashed green. Sync confirmed. BIO pair registered. Class 3. Purge status. Overridden. Civil union logged. He stared at it. The AI had accepted it. Narration rested her forehead against his shoulder. She didn't speak, but her entire body relaxed for the first time since she'd arrived. No more bracing. No more flinching. They stood like that for a long while, letting the warmth between them do what the systems no longer could. Later, they returned to the sleeping platform. Rain offered her his cot. She refused. Instead, she sat down beside him and quietly asked, "If I stay close just for warmth, is that okay?" He didn't speak. He simply shifted aside and made space. She lay down beside him, not touching at first, but the proximity grew natural, gradual. Her body curled toward his under the blanket. No rush, no shame. They shared breath, shared space, and for the first time, the tower didn't feel like a bunker. It felt like shelter. She fell asleep against his side, and this time, so did he. The cold remained, but it no longer felt hostile. When Rain woke, Narration was already moving around the central room, silent but present. The coat was draped over her shoulders, her hair tied back with a salvaged filament wire, and her skin glowed faintly again. She was rebuilding routine from what little they had, clearing rations, scanning water purity, adjusting thermal vent angles. It wasn't about order. It was about claiming space. This time, not as a guest, but as someone who lived here too. Rain sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His body ached from the chill in the floor, but his thoughts stayed fixed on the night before. Not the danger, not the scan. The way she'd reached for him, slowly, without panic. The way her voice didn't shake anymore. Narration turned, catching his eyes, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no tension, just awareness. Mutual. "You snore," she said plainly. He blinked, then exhaled a short laugh. "You sure it wasn't the ventilation?" "No," she said deadpan. "That was you." He nodded. "Fair." Her face didn't change much, but he caught a flicker, something close to a smile, at the edge of her mouth. That subtle lift changed the temperature of the entire room. They ate together at the floor panel near the heating vent. She rationed her bites, still efficient, but less wary. When their fingers brushed reaching for a water pouch, she didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She let the contact linger. "Do you remember the first time you bonded?" Rain asked. Narration looked up slowly. Her gaze didn't harden, but it grew distant. "Yes, I was 17. It was ritual, controlled, surrounded by my cohort. There was music, warmth, and no one was watching to punish us for it. Do you miss it?" She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. The bandages had come off that morning. Her skin beneath was healing, still marked, still cracked, but stronger. "I miss not having to trade it for safety," she said. Rain didn't push further. He let that truth hang where it needed to. The system panel beeped. They both turned. The light flashing wasn't red. It was blue. Narration stood and walked toward the screen. Rain followed. Flag ping received. Source: Administrative Zone 8. Audit prep signal. Rain's throat tightened. "It's not a purge," he said, "but it's worse." She read the screen, her expression sharpening. "They sent a verification request," she said. "They're auditing irregular pair bonds, which means our sync got noticed." "It wasn't supposed to," Rain muttered. Narration was already pulling up the subdirectory behind the message. "Relax," she said calmly. "We were registered under Class 3. That includes humanitarian extensions, emergency bonding protocols." "Yeah," Rain said, "but that only holds if no red flags come up on either party." She stopped typing, looked at him. Rain swallowed. "There's something you should know." Narration crossed her arms. "Tell me." "I was the one who approved the cultural deletion of the Ruarian rituals from the Central Archive Registry. Years ago, I signed off on the classification that led to your people being labeled incompatible." Her face didn't change. Not right away. Then her eyes narrowed. Not in anger, but calculation. "You're saying you're partially responsible for the collapse of my sect?" "Yes." She looked at him a long time. Quiet, breathing steady. Then she said something he didn't expect. "I already knew." Rain blinked. "How? I recognized your name when I saw your access tag. You were on our deletion summary file." He stared at her, stunned. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because the man I met here, cold, alone, buried under a ruined tower, wasn't the same man who filed that order. And because I wanted to see what you'd do when you realized what you'd taken from me." He swallowed the rising guilt in his throat. "You should hate me." "I did," she said simply. "Now I'm not sure what I feel." That honesty hit harder than any accusation. She looked away for a moment, then added, "But I know what I don't want. I don't want to die with hatred in my chest." Rain nodded slowly. Then let's survive without it. They both turned back to the terminal. The audit was a slow protocol. It wouldn't escalate for at least 72 hours. But in that time, they need to build enough bioresonance data to pass as a genuine emotional pair, something the system could log and forget. Rain looked at her again, at her posture, now upright and unflinching, at her skin, once bruised and dull, now glowing faintly with health, at her eyes, still watchful, but no longer empty. 3 days, he said, to make it real. It's already real, she said. Then, without warning, she stepped closer. No ceremony, no ritual. She kissed him, a slow, deliberate press of her lips against his. Not aggressive, not performative, but rooted in the kind of trust that doesn't need explanation. And Rain kissed her back, not as apology, not as relief, but as choice. They weren't bonded by survival anymore. They were bonded by will. And this time, there was nothing artificial about it. They didn't speak for a long time after the kiss. Narration didn't pull away. She stood in the circle of his arms, her forehead lightly resting against his, the tension in her shoulders slowly melting under the warmth they shared. No more trembling, no bracing, just presence. When she finally looked up, there was something in her face that hadn't been there before. Not relief, not desire, permission. Rain stepped back just enough to see her fully. He studied her eyes, teal, glowing faintly beneath the flicker of the emergency lights, and searched for doubt. There was none. I don't know how to do this the right way, he admitted. There is no right way, she said. Only real. The terminal on the far wall pulsed blue again. A quiet reminder. Audit sequence in progress, day 1 of 3. Rain looked at the clock. 4:42. If they wanted the sync to pass a depth scan, they needed to show emotional proximity, sustained, varied, and reciprocal. It wasn't about sex. It was about closeness, resonance. Narration moved first. She turned and sat down on the floor mat beside the heating coil and unfastened the belt cinched around her waist. She didn't disrobe. She simply let the outer tunic loosen so her body could relax. Rain sat beside her. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt earned. Do you remember your last bond? She asked softly. He paused. I haven't in years. Before the collapse. She worked in atmospheric calibration. We didn't survive the first resettlement wave. Narration looked over at him. You lost her. She didn't want to go underground. I did. I thought it was safer. He left at that. Narration nodded once. It's harder to carry the weight of choice than loss. She was right. They spent the morning rebuilding the central chamber for 2, moving blankets, sealing the upper vents with salvage panels, arranging the supply crates into a low wall that gave the space a sense of structure. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was no longer just shelter. Narration found a broken mirror plate in one of the unused comm cabinets. She leaned it against the far wall and stood in front of it for a long time, her fingers tracing the ink on her thighs, now almost faded but still distinct. These marks used to pulse when we bonded, she said. Now, they're just decoration. They're still beautiful, Rain said. She glanced back at him. You don't even know what they mean. Then show me. She walked over, knelt beside him, and slowly pulled back her tunic to expose the looping lines that curved along her hips and upper thighs. Each line shimmered faintly in the dim light. Woven symbols interlocked like code. This one, she said, pointing to the left curve, meant chosen in warmth. And this one here, she traced the outer line on her thigh, meant not born but trusted. That was our highest honor. He nodded. And now, they mean whatever I decide they mean. She took his hand and placed it gently on the outermost symbol. This means seen. His breath caught. Her skin was warm under his fingers. The glow intensified slightly, not from tech, not from ritual, but from contact. They stayed like that for minutes, not moving. No words, no fear. Later that night, after ration packs and silent glances and fingers brushing over tools passed back and forth, she lay beside him again on the same mat. This time she didn't ask. She simply curled toward him and pressed her cheek against his shoulder. Her body folded into his like a natural shape, not practiced, not forced. The lights dimmed on their own as the generator cycled down for the night. He pulled the blanket over both of them. I want to survive this audit, she whispered, but not because I'm hiding. I want to survive it because we chose to stay together. Rain looked at her in the dark. You're not surviving anymore, he said. You're living. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she arrived, she smiled. The tower was quiet. No wind, no alarms, just soft mechanical hums and the occasional pop of heating coils adjusting to their reduced load. Rain sat cross-legged by the central terminal, staring at the audit status screen. The blue interface blinked steadily. Cohabitation audit final day. Emotional sync level, stable. Bond validity, pending closure. Behind him, Narration moved silently through the upper chamber, rewrapping her thigh with fresh bandage fabric she'd cut from one of his spare tunics. She wasn't covering wounds anymore. She was reshaping her body story. The ink had faded, but her posture no longer did. She glanced over. Still waiting. Final pulse scans in 30 minutes, Rain said. That'll confirm the sync. And if it flags us, it won't. She tilted her head. You sound sure. I am. There was no fear in him now. The systems had pushed them to the edge, but in doing so, had given them something real to hold on to. Narration walked to the sleeping platform and sat down beside him. She was barefoot, wearing only the hybrid garment she'd stitched from his gear and her old wrap. It clung to her hips, exposing one shoulder and part of her side where the ink shimmered faintly. She looked at him. Before the scan finishes, I want to choose it. Not because we're flagged. Not because we need it. Rain turned toward her. Her hand rested on his chest, above his heart. I want to bond with you, Rain sullen. Fully, willingly, while we still have this time. He reached up, closed his fingers around hers. You already have. She leaned forward, their foreheads touching. Their breaths warm, steady. No ceremony followed. No ritual. Only deliberate closeness. Undressed slowly, one layer at a time. Her body against his, skin warming skin, hands exploring not with hunger, but with recognition. They moved without speaking, each gesture intentional, every breath shared. He lay her back gently onto the mat, her silver white hair spilling over the blanket like thread light. Her body curved up to meet him, cool where the night still lingered, but warming rapidly beneath his touch. She welcomed him without hesitation, thighs wrapping around his waist, breath catching once, then deepening. Their bodies moved together in slow, deep rhythm. She arched into him, hands clutching his back, lips brushing his neck, his name whispered like it had always belonged to her. He held her face as he moved within her, watching her eyes, the pulse beneath her skin glowing in time with his own. There was no rush, no urgency, only release. Not from need, but from choosing. When they finally lay still, tangled in warmth and sweat and the slow quiet that follows truth, she rested her head on his chest and whispered, "Now it's real." He kissed her forehead. It always was. The audit terminal pinged behind them. He didn't move. Neither did she. Eventually, he reached over and tapped the screen. Audit complete. Pair bond. Verified. Purging canceled. Tower status. Exempt/habitable. Narration stared at the screen, then looked back at him. No more hiding. No, he said. We're not flagged anymore. We're recorded. Accepted. She shifted up to face him, her eyes searching his. Is that enough for you? He smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. No, he said. But you are. She laughed once, soft, real, slightly shaky. Then she touched her stomach, as if out of instinct. Her expression changed. Her fingers lingered. I think, she said slowly, that we might have started something more permanent. He looked at her hand, then into her eyes, and saw it. Not fear. Hope. A future. They sat in silence, forehead to forehead, until the sky outside began to lighten, just faintly, beyond the cracks in the ceiling. The tower remained standing. But for the first time in years, so did something stronger. Them. Together. 3 weeks had passed since the last system ping. The tower no longer felt like a refuge carved out of danger. It had changed, not dramatically, but in quiet ways. Tools were arranged with purpose now. The central room had been insulated further. The vents no longer hissed unpredictably. Narration had rearranged the sleeping space, now wider, padded with scavenged mats, lined with soft cloth from repurposed rations packaging. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. Their home. It was raining that night. Not outside, but from the interior condensation system cycling through a flush. Water clinked gently against old vent grates, soft and rhythmic. Rain stood near the terminal, shirt half unfastened, scanning nutrient levels in the water filters. The air was warmer now. The coil systems had stabilized. Behind him, Narration stretched out on the sleeping platform, reclined on her side, propped up on one elbow. She wore only a loosely wrapped tunic, light, sleeveless, falling off one shoulder. Her skin glowed faintly in the dark, a subtle emerald tone muted by calm. He turned. Their eyes met. She didn't smile, but her gaze told him exactly what she wanted. "Come to bed," she said, voice low, even, assured. He crossed the room slowly. The cot creaked slightly as he sat down beside her, hands resting on his thighs. She reached up, pulled gently at the half-open edge of his shirt. "I've wanted this," she said, without needing it. He nodded. "That's why I want it too. No urgency, no fear." He leaned down, kissed her, not like the first time, not with uncertainty or weight, but with depth, familiar, anchored. Her fingers slid beneath the fabric of his shirt, palms warm against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. He peeled the tunic from her shoulders, letting it fall behind her. Her skin was warm now, soft under his hands, glowing with life. He traced the faded markings on her thigh with his mouth, feeling her breath catch beneath him. Narayan's legs wrapped around his waist. She pulled him down with strength, not desperation, but desire sharpened by safety. He entered her slowly, fully. She arched against him, her mouth parting slightly, eyes locked with his. There were no whispered words, just sound, breaths shared, skin sliding against skin. He moved inside her with slow, grounded rhythm, deep, measured. Her hips lifted to meet each motion. Her hands gripped the back of his neck, nails grazing skin. The only light in the room was her, bioluminescent pulses growing brighter with each wave of pleasure. Time fell away. The storm outside was forgotten. Only them, only this. When she climaxed, it wasn't quiet, it was full from the chest. Her body convulsed gently beneath him, thighs clenching, breath sharp, then dissolving into a long, low exhale. He followed moments later, his body folding into hers, lips on her shoulder, forehead pressed to her temple. They stayed joined like that. Still, warm, whole. Later, she curled beside him, one leg hooked over his, her hand resting on her stomach. The space beneath her palm had changed, slightly firmer, fuller. He placed his hand over hers. "We're going to need more mats," he murmured. She laughed, a soft, real laugh. "We'll need more everything." "You're not afraid?" he asked. "I was," she said, "but not now. Not with you." He pulled her closer, blanket draped over both of them, her hair tucked under his chin. The tower creaked softly around them. Outside, ash drifted past the shattered windows like snow. But inside, there was nothing missing anymore. Not warmth, not purpose, not love, and not her.